Hello, it's George at DJ Band Supply. We're going to do a quick little video here on balancing a turntable tone arm and leveling a turntable tone arm. We have Dave Thompson from Marshank Sales. He's going to be helping us do the video, so check it out.
Alright, welcome back. We're here at DJ Band Supply with my good friend George talking about how to set up your turntable properly to make sure that you get the best tracking and the least amount of wear on your records. And one of the things that most people forget when they're doing this is to take a look at the height of your tone arm in relation to the record. So we're going to use one of our fancy Serato control vinyls here because we don't actually need to hear what's on the record. We're just using it to make sure that we're at a normal height. We'll talk a little bit more about rain later in another video. But what we're also going to show you is these guys, which is a little bit back in the video earlier I mentioned butter rugs and different types of ways to set up your slip mats. This is one of the alternative methods that I talked about. It's good for turntablists. So what I'm talking about here is this little piece of plastic. Often this is the lubricant that makes everything easier. So people will put this down on the platter like so, and then take your tablecloth mat, which is actually two different materials. It's a microfiber felt on top and a space age resin on the bottom that is much slicker. And when you combine these two, it is a really, really slick interface. And I don't mean slick in the traditional way. So with this kind of setup, you can really get down on any kind of scratching, do any sort of manipulation, and you're not going to affect the platter rotation. It's just going to spin underneath. Notice how I'm just spinning this around with a single finger and barely any pressure. George is just barely holding the platter for me in the background here. And notice if he wasn't holding the platter, I'm not really getting a whole lot of movement.
But I mean, I can stop it that easy.
If I were using a traditional slip mat, especially if I were to take this piece off, just go like this, I'd get a lot more friction. Some guys like a little more friction. They want the record to catch up a little faster. Some guys like to really spin, doing back spins and things like that. So these are just different ways that you can set up your turntable to make it work in the best way possible for your style. So now let's get back into the technical part. We're going to get really crazy here and use a square. This square actually has metric readout on the side here, so I can measure the height of the turntable and make sure that I'm actually level. So we'll go back to my Serato control record here and get it on the platter. And for those of you that don't know, Serato is a way to control digital files on your laptop from a turntable. And this is the control record that does that. So get this guy on there, and George, if you could unhook the tone arm and use the cueing lever as well. We like to use this little guy. This is how you keep from dropping the needle on your record and breaking it. This little guy is the magic tone arm lift, also known as the cue arm lift, or the cue lift. So go ahead and slide that needle onto the record and move the guard too, so that we're actually going to be on the needle in real life. So you'll see how when this arm is up, we're floating right now. So when we put this guy down, it very gently sets our needle down magically. So once we've done that, George, I'm going to scooch you out of the shot here. I'm going to come over here like this, and I'm actually going to measure my tone arm, and I'm going to get up close to the pivot point as I possibly can. And I'm going to measure how many millimeters I am off the top deck. And this isn't going to be 100% military accurate, but it's going to be pretty close. And that looks like about 35 millimeters right there. And then I'm going to come over here and I'm going to measure again. And I see, just by looking at my eyeballs here, I'm getting a little older, so I don't know how good this is, but it gives me a good frame of reference. This looks like it's about maybe 33.5, 34 millimeters. So what that tells me is that I'm about a millimeter low on the needle side. So once I know that, I can come over here and I can unlock my turntable, and I probably should lift my needle up because I got fat fingers too, and if I hit this tone arm, the needle's going to bounce all over the place. Then I've broken George's needle, and that's just not a good thing. DJs don't like it when you break their needles. So let's go back to unlocking the tone arm here. Kind of hard to see in the picture, I'm sure, but we'll get you a close-up later. There's a little switch here that says lock on it, and that locks the height adjustment. Once that's unlocked, we can see some numbers here on the dial, and that allows us to move the tone arm height up and down. So I'm just going to move it down a little bit so that hopefully I'm back to my 34 millimeter spot. And then I know I'm exactly flat. Of course I need to put this down to be able to measure that, but you guys can see how I'm measuring here and measuring here to see that it's equal, and thus the tone arm is straight. Once we get to that point, we know that our needle is now vertical, and it's not going to dig into the record by going this way when we backspin, or this way and digging into the record, which makes your record wear really quickly, and you'll probably break a needle if you try to scratch that way. So that's the most important first step. A lot of guys miss that before they start to balance the turntable. So we do that first, and then we come over here and put our guard back down to protect the needle. Now we can start balancing using this counterweight here. So if you guys have ever been on a postal scale or a triple beam in your science class or something like that, it's pretty much the same concept. We've got our fulcrum right here, our counterweight, and what we're trying to do is equal the weight here and here so that it floats. And in our last step, we went over making sure that your tone arm is nice and level, and now I'm going to show you how to balance it. And I've set it up so that it's extremely out of balance, and you guys can really easily see that I've got way too much weight on this side. And for those of you who've never done this before, I'm just going to go over a little bit of the pieces involved here. Most of you are watching from the beginning, so I'll assume that you know what I'm talking about with this end of the business. But on this end here, we've got our counterweight. And like I said, it's very similar to a triple beam in your science class or a postal scale, where we're really just balancing this end versus this end. And the reason for that is that there's hundreds of styles of needles out there, and also hundreds of styles of playing, if not more. So some guys like a really heavy needle, some guys like a little bit lighter needle, and of course, because there's so many different kinds out there, they all have different weights, and they all operate at an optimum range, and that's not always the same. So if you're using this style of needle, the 44/7s, I think generally they like to operate in the 3 gram range, but the best thing to do is to find out the type of needle that you have and go to the manufacturer's website and look at the specifications. They always list the optimum tracking range and the optimum anti-skate as well. So back to setting up the balance. I've got my trusty Techniques head shell with my favorite 44/7 needles from Shure here. And as you can see, I'm really heavily weighted on the back, so I'm going to make it balance. So all I'm going to do is just take this counterweight here, and I'm going to turn it until obviously I've got a little weight on the front end here, but you can see how I just touch it with my finger. We're pretty close to being balanced. So I'm just going to mess with it a little bit until I get dead on. And that's pretty close. This isn't super duper rocket science, so as long as you're pretty close, it's okay. Next step, once you've got a good balance like I do, is to make sure that the marking dial, not the whole counterweight, but the marking dial lines up with the 0 on the back of your tone arm here. And we'll try to get some close-up shots later so you guys can see what I'm talking about. But that way you know you're starting at 0. We're balanced, the weight's at 0. And then your final step, once you know what the optimum weight for tracking is, turn your counterweight to that amount. So in this case, I'm actually going to set it to 2.5 so that we're just a little lighter. You'll want to play with the needle setup and listen to it, and the sound that you're listening to make sure that your needles are properly balanced is an overabundance of sibilants on the high end. That's the tss, tss, tss sound that you hear when you have a hi-hat or someone using the S sound. If you have a little bit too much of that, that means you're probably a little too heavy. So right here, you'll see this dial, and that's telling us exactly how much weight we're putting on the needle. And only if you've started at 0, of course. So balance the tone arm first, set it to 0 with this dial, and then you turn it to the desired amount of vertical tracking force.
So hopefully you guys liked that video, Dave explaining how to get that tone arm perfectly balanced and everything it has to do with making your turntable work correctly and not wear stuff out. Want to thank him for coming down here and doing that. I want to thank you guys for watching our video. This is we always appreciate you watching our YouTube channel. Love to see you subscribe to it. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter. If you're looking to buy these products, we have them in our store here in Los Angeles. You can get them at djbandsupply.com. We have financing in-house. If you come here into the store, 6 months, same as cash. Have you out of here in 10 minutes with the gear, no money down. Can't get better than that. Thank you very much.